You have made it just in time. Your go-to podcast for all things e-commerce logistics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our new podcast episode of Just in Time, our series for logistics experts and those who want to improve their supply chain setup. I'm Petra. I'm co-founder of Byrd, an e-commerce fulfillment company. And today we have Leon from Spherecast as a guest here. Hi, welcome, Leon.
Hi, Petra. Thanks for having me.
Very happy that you're here, Leon. And today we're going to be talking about how to basically stock up for success. So how to manage inventory in the right way, especially in the e-commerce setup. Leon and his company, they have great experience with this. So I thought it would be an exciting guest to invite to our episode. Leon, maybe you can just share some brief introduction about you. And I think we're going to hear a bit more about what Spherecast does, but maybe just a general intro from your side.
Sure. Will do, Petra. So hi, everybody. I'm Leon, one of the co-founders of Spherecast. We're building an inventory co-pilot for multi-channel e-com brands. So we support those brands with basically all things inventory planning, replenishment, and inventory optimization so that we reduce stockouts and overstock situations, improve visibility into inventory, and of course, save time. And I'm happy to be here today, Petra, and sharing my experiences and my learning so far.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Leon, for agreeing to join us. And I think what we always like to talk about is just very practical examples. And I think we have quite a lot of them prepared. So I'm excited to dive right into it. Maybe what we can start with is generally the importance of inventory management and the cost of stockouts. So what's your view on this? Basically, I think from an e-commerce brand's perspective, it's quite clear, right, that if you don't have the right amount of products on stock, it brings quite a lot of challenges. But maybe you can also share a bit your view why. I mean, basically, you started a company around it, right? So what were your thoughts? Why this is so important for e-commerce brands?
Yeah. Great question, Petra. So it all started when we talk with e-com brands about their pain points and their daily struggles. And most of the time we saw that stockouts or inventory planning is a huge pain point, not only from a business perspective, because stockouts means lost revenue, but also on a day-to-day basis of like, hey, what should I reorder? How much? I have a setup of, 2 warehouses, 3 warehouses, 3 sales channels, Shopify, Amazon, maybe B2B. All those micro decisions on a day-to-day basis were super stressful for most of the people. And that's where kind of we thought there's the right place to build a company around it and help many supply chain and ops managers around this specific problem.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, right. It's not just a long-term strategic topic. It's also really day-to-day. And it sounds a lot 100%. Like the data and the planning and really the analytics around it are what makes it really hard for e-commerce brands to operate efficiently. So maybe what's your view around that? Is that the core of the problem?
I would say it has 2 dimensions, definitely. So one is the analytics side of things. So aligning operations and sales. So when it comes to planning, not only revenue and planning not only sales per month per year, but also translating that into units for each SKU. On the other hand, I think visibility is often a lacking factor. If you think about a classical multi-channel, maybe also multi-warehouse e-com setup, sometimes an ERP system, then you have a shop system, and then you have your Excel sheet for basically planning, right? And then you have to align with people on this Excel sheet, export sales data from the ERP or the shop system into those Excel sheets. So there's a lot of, back and forth with syncing data and also no visibility in the whole value chain of inventory planning, which is basically forecasting and planning per SKU, then replenishing. So thinking about what to reorder, what to send into my other warehouses, and then also cash flow implications, right? So what is my cash outflow based on my decisions or my future decisions, which ties back to cash flow forecasting. And one important aspect is if you ask around e-com brands, how do you measure success around supply chain and ops? And here often, getting the numbers right is first because of this, decoupled setup quite difficult. Think about product availability. Think about what is my actual inventory value? How do I value my inventory? Basically, even those areas we see, that's where we come into play and help. But giving people the visibility as a first step is already a huge value add.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine, and I think we'll deep dive right into that as well, into the multi-warehouse setup, right? Because that's where the complexity gets even bigger. But yeah, I think
100%.
definitely that is those are the issues that we hear about quite a lot on a day-to-day basis. So maybe let's dive into the topic a bit more in detail, right? So we understand it's important, and especially the data side is super important. Do you have maybe some examples of basically successful decisions when it comes to data-driven inventory management? Because they, as I said, like always, practical examples are always the best.
I can bring into examples from successful brands we work with, our more experienced brand in that direction, which is from a process and technical perspective. One is having a dedicated sales and operations meeting where all stakeholders are aligned on what is our plan, as I said from the beginning, from a revenue perspective, but what is that translated to from a supply chain perspective? What does it mean in units I need to reorder? What does it mean in units I need to send into other warehouses? And then kind of fixing a forecast for every SKU and aligning on this, right? And then I'm coming to the technical perspective now. Having a good baseline forecast for every SKU when it comes to different seasonalities, different growth rates, different outliers we had in the past. One specific example, coming back to stockouts again, if I was stocked out last year in a specific period and now I'm in this forecasting this specific period again, I cannot just copy paste the data from last year because I would, take the stockouts to this year. But this actually happens, especially in a like in a setup where you have a lot of SKUs. This frequently happens, and just getting those details right from a technical perspective, extremely important. And then building on top of this baseline forecast with inputs from marketing and sales within those sales and ops meetings is what we see as, one of the most successful directions how you can basically plan and reduce headache in stockouts.
Yeah. That's a really good point, right? Because as you describe it, I think sometimes inventory is seen as this little bit of a black box, right? And you copy paste what you had last year, as you're saying, but then the devil is in the details.
100%.
So I think it's good that you mentioned it, because in one of our previous episodes we also discussed more about the procurement and the inbound supply chain. I think there also the conclusion was that at the end of the day, the alignment between different teams is super essential. And
Definitely.
this is usually where the big challenges come up when it doesn't happen.
Fully agree, Petra.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe moving over to something you also mentioned before is that you said, it's about forecasting, but also replenishment. So maybe is there some kind of structure or how you view inventory planning in general for basically logistics experts, how they can think about it very high level?
Yeah, definitely. So I would think about inventory planning as minimum those two pillars, which one is planning and one is executing on the plan. And the first one, planning, is forecasting per SKU, which is incredibly important. So here you want to, on the planning side, you want to optimize for forecast accuracy, right? And this has a technical perspective, as I said, and also a process perspective of aligning with all the stakeholders. So that in the next step, you would understand, okay, I have different demand per SKU. What is a product which I can forecast quite well because the seasonality is predictable or there's not many outliers, and what are products which I cannot forecast well. And this now has implications on the replenishment. Here we come back to safety stocks, right? The more variance you have in your demand, the higher your safety stock for the specific SKU should be. The better you can forecast the product, the less safety stock you need, right? And this is super important, how forecasting ties back to basically stock. And then from the replenishment side, now you have you fix demand. Basically you have your stock levels, you have your dynamic safety stocks, and now you need to think about, okay, what's my desired coverage for my products? Do I want to reorder every month, every 2 months? Having a fixed reorder cycle now, building on top of stock levels, dynamic safety stock, and my demand, and then actually doing the right reordering decisions because I fixed all the variables before. And this is incredibly important. So as you see, many variables involved. Forecasting, replenishment ties with each other quite importantly.
And out of interest, because you mentioned the replenishment, and you could do that every 2 months or whatever. Thinking about how this works with our customers, I would say usually the replenishment is a bit more ad hoc. Do you like? Is it realistic from your point of view to have like these replenishment cycles?
I think so. And we learned that also over time while we worked with brands together. So when we started, we saw many things, but tying back to the sales and operations meeting to these reorder cycles. So I think the better you plan, the more predictable your reorders can be, basically.
Yeah.
And the less thought you put into forecasting and planning, the more, impulsive your reordering decisions. Pretty simple, right? Like if you don't have too much overview about your plan, you just look at, okay, there's a lot of stock being consumed because of something, I guess, right?
Yeah.
We need to just reorder and just hope for the best and not run into stockouts. That's kind of the status quo we see for most of the brands. For like I would say top 10% when it comes to planning replenishment, it's really our orders, our order cycle is 1 month. This is our safety stock. This is our plan. This is our forecast accuracy for those SKUs. We have a dynamic safety stock. So that is the logical consequence that this is our reorder quantity and we just execute on it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it. And, it just is a switch from being very reactive in a way
100%.
to being much more proactive. And I guess, especially as you professionalize as a brand, this is something you should do more actively. Yeah.
I fully agree, especially as you grow. What we see, Petra, is this topic gets, is a bottleneck quite fast when you enter new sales channels, right?
Yeah.
We have Shopify, Amazon, and then maybe we go into retail, right? Then maybe we're next to our fulfillment services at Byrd, we have FBA, for example, and then we need to send in goods there as well. So having an overview there and having a dedicated person to look over this whole setup is extremely important, and potentially also tools to support this day to day.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned already a few metrics while explaining this, but are there any key metrics that you would recommend looking at?
Great question, Petra. I think 2 metrics are incredibly important. Very simple, but very powerful if you measure progress there. One is product availability. From a supply chain perspective, you want to have your products in stock at all times while not, overshooting your inventory value, right? You could be in stock forever, but if you have 10 million in goods locked in your inventory, that's problematic. So you want to increase your product availability while decreasing inventory value. How do you do that? With better planning and replenishment. Right. So this is how inventory planning can actually be a growth lever for many brands, increasing or decreasing stockouts, increasing revenue, decreasing time, and especially increasing inventory turnover, which then ties back to cash conversion, which helps to have more cash on hand. So that's incredibly important to see. Inventory planning, supply chain planning is kind of a key partner for growth, I would say.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that's often kind of underestimated, the importance of it.
Definitely.
Yeah. And thinking about, how to determine the optimal inventory levels, do you have any recommendations, how to plan for the right inventory levels, and also how to factor in maybe market trends or seasonality into those decisions? You already mentioned a few of the factors, right? But basically, how do you think, are there any additional factors to keep in mind?
Yeah, definitely. So I would start with thinking about dynamic safety stock. And in a nutshell, dynamic safety stock looks at demand variance, and also lead time and lead time variance, basically, right? So the more variance you have on your demand and the more variance you have on your lead time, the more safety stock you would need, basically. The more confident you are in both numbers, or because demand is more predictable, the less safety stock you need. So this is component number 1. Then you want to decide, okay, what's my desired coverage, right? We talked about a reordering cycle of every month, right? You sit down in a specific week and reorder for this, for a specific month because you plan quite well. Or you could even do a cycle of every 2 months, right? To get away from this reactive setup. And then you would think about, okay, my reorder now has to be over my safety stock, and when the PO arrives, it should be again for exactly 30 days until the next PO arrives. And then you have, if you think about an inventory graph, you would have a stable reorder cycle. And then again, you would have a stable cash outflow if you think about it. And that's pretty important. The more stable you are on your cash flow side, the better you can grow because you can be more confident in decisions.
Yeah. And just to challenge that a little bit in the sense of that sounds makes total sense to me. But do you see any limitations with, for example, brands who are sourcing from China, or who basically are a bit bound by the supply chain setup that they have, which might not enable them to reorder every month because there's a container coming from China? Is this? I'm not sure, right? This is kind of the concerns we hear sometimes. I'm not sure if it's true or not.
Yeah, it's a great question, Petra, and I do see the points. What we also always kind of give back is the indication of, again, the topic of safety stock. If you just, I hope one of the listeners take that out of it, which is ABC XYZ analysis, right? This is just a very standard formula from a supply chain perspective. And part of that is actually the lead time and the variance of the lead time, because as you said, some supply chains are just harder to predict. There's more variance within production plus the shipment, right? It's hard to predict. Hence, I would need a bigger safety stock there. Definitely. So you would want to reorder more if you don't have enough stock. But it's important, I would say, to really nail down the safety stock quantity first, and then split the stock between safety stock plus what is actually my coverage or my inventory, which gets consumed over time, and getting more stable reordering cycles. I think that's pretty important, that you need more stock as a buffer. Definitely.
Perfect. So maybe let's move over to kind of a next section, which I would say quite important as well, is overstocked and understocked products. And basically, how do you determine that, right? How do you determine what is overstocked, what is understocked? What's your experience with this?
This is a great question, Petra. I think the first step would be to pin down internally what it means to be overstocked or understocked, right? This is already something people are not aware of. But to give you some indications, we have some brands, when we plugged in Spherecast for the first time, they had stock which they could have reordered 3 times because their lead time is much shorter, right? So that's for me already an indication of like, hey, maybe in your next reorder cycle, pin down the rest as a safety stock now and think about how to reduce that over time. This is kind of the supply chain perspective, getting better with reordering. There's different methods from a sales and marketing perspective for sure, of like discounts, but if we do not want to kind of decrease bottom line profits, then we would think about being better at reordering. So that's kind of the answer I can give of like, if you could have reordered your stock 2 or 3 times in that time until it is fully consumed, then you might be overstocked in a specific SKU. When it comes to understocking, quite simple. If you're running late on stock, think about your days of inventory, right? If my lead time is 60 days and I look at my Excel sheet, for example, and my days of inventory is 58, then I know, things get tricky now, right? If I'm less, then stress starts usually. So you want to really think about, again, safety stock, then your lead time, and then have this, time period where you want to reorder, not below that, right? And then over time, if you fix those 2 points, what is understocked, what is overstocked, you can actually measure your progress towards a healthy inventory, right? And this is what we see most of the brands do not do yet. And I think, again, tying back to my points in the beginning, how important inventory planning basically is for revenue, for cash flow. It's pretty important to track that.
And is there any indication you can give? Basically, what would you define as a healthy inventory? Like, is there still some room for having, like, is it common that you still are under or overstocked, or what is kind of the best in class there? Do you have any experience with that?
Again, from a process perspective, I would tie back to this example of a brand having, safety stocks in place, having a stable reordering cycle, having, stable planning. I would say if you check the box there, then you're already from a process perspective, it's healthy. And then again, this leads to healthy inventory levels, because then you would think about, I want to cover my inventory for 30 days. So then I have my safety stock. My PO will best case arrive when I'm close to my safety stock, and then this cycle continues. And I just potentially adjust the reorder quantity, which I can do because I fixed my planning, or I'm planning quite well. And this again does not lead to this factor of I have too much inventory, which is a factor of my lead time, for example, and not too less, because I either way have a safety stock, which is a buffer for exactly this variance we talked about.
Yeah.
So you're not run into stockouts. And I think over time, the best brands, as I said, track their progress from product availability. I'm not losing revenue basically on my best sellers, plus my inventory value. And then the value over time decreases because you potentially can get more confident in your reordering decisions, decreasing the safety stock again over time, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I think, the best supply chain ops teams perform.
Yeah. That's really, really good insights. And we have this set up with our own customers, which is that we are a 3PL provider, and so they're outsourcing their logistics. And of course, there's also other brands who do their logistics in-house. And I think there you feel the need a bit more to do this well, to plan. I think if you use a 3PL, maybe it's not always the highest priority to have really clear inventory planning, because there's always so much going on, of course. Would you still say there's value in having good inventory planning, even if you're outsourcing your logistics?
I mean, definitely, because one thing is, at the end of the day, if you're stocked out, right, you lose on revenue, regardless if you have your own warehouse or if you outsource it. The other one, if you're overstocked, again, you lock capitals, which you need for other decisions. For example, different reorders, right? You don't want to be cash bottleneck there. And then the value, I think, in the partnership lies, if you think about this supply chain triangle between supplier, brand, and fulfillment provider, is if everyone's aligned on a plan, then, for example, the supplier can produce goods more predictable because the brand shared their plans, for example. And same for you. I'd be interested in your point of view here, but I'm assuming the better the brand plans, and if they share the plan with you, the better you can plan your internal operations, and then ensure even better that service levels are whole, right?
Yeah.
But love to get your point of view here, Petra.
Yeah, definitely, right? I think that's a bit the crucial thing to keep in mind, that especially when you have maybe unplanned peaks or you're out of stock and it creates backlogs of orders, I think you risk creating a customer experience with the recipient that is worse than usual. And so I think that's also what's interesting for me, looking at it from kind of a marketing perspective, right? As a marketer, you're trying to create this huge interest. Maybe you launch a new product or you create a peak in interest. But then I think what you're often creating is maybe a worse customer experience because of the supply chain not being prepared for that. And you risk kind of creating sales, just one-time sales and not reoccurring sales, because that experience is worse than usual. So I also think if you're thinking about kind of the long-term value you're trying to generate, the best long-term value is, of course, if the supply chain is really well aligned, the fulfillment provider is aware and can fulfill the orders just as quickly as any other orders, because that will create kind of this wow experience with the recipient. But I think also your point is super, super valuable, right? Even kind of ignoring this part, still as an e-commerce brand, as you're saying, the cash and those factors are kind of independent of whether you're doing it in-house or not. For your business, it's still super essential that the planning is well done.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Lots of interesting points you're mentioning. There's a few indicators we already discussed now that are important to look at. Would you say that there are any indicators that one should avoid because they're maybe not showing the right measures, or is it kind of the more indicators the better?
It's a great point. I think what is really, really important is to at least look at product availability and inventory value at the same time. Because if you just isolate one of it, it could be misleading. If you have a great product availability, but as I said, 5 million in stock, that's problematic. And if you just look at inventory value without having, insights about your product availability, that's also problematic, right? So I'd really look at those two together. And then there's, of course, more you can take into account, right? You could look at weighted coverage, for example. If you think about your inventory, if you think about your units in stock and how long they will cover, then you can weigh the specific coverage by revenue or by, absolute units. So then you have a KPI of like, okay, what's my actual coverage now? And then you would get a picture of, my bestseller, I need it in stock, but I actually have way too much of that in stock. Right. And then you could deep dive into, okay, where should I be better? Right. Because from a high level perspective, it's good to have those two KPIs, and then you can basically go deeper and deeper and then track down what is going well and what's not. Same with the forecasting perspective, right? If you're planning your SKUs over time in your sales and operations meeting or wherever, so you want to measure, am I planning well, which is from a process perspective, right? Am I well aligned with sales and marketing? And from a technical perspective, do I have a great baseline forecast? And you want to track that over time, because then again, you get better in your reordering decisions, right? So tracking every layer when it comes to planning and replenishment, super important. But if you just want to start today, product availability, inventory value, is already a great start, and getting that right is for some already harder than it might sound due to this decouplement of all the systems. Right.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Those are really good points. And I'm kind of thinking again back to the point of the example with the Chinese setup with the container shipments taking a long time. I think again what you're saying, what you said at the beginning with the inventory availability, or basically and the cash being bound. I think maybe in some cases you could even come to the conclusion that your supply chain is too unflexible, right? And that you need to change the setup that you have, because this balance is you cannot basically achieve the right balance with the supply chain setup that you have right now. So I think it's a super, as you're saying, that those are the most important indicators, I think, to keep in mind.
Actually, great point, Petra. I mean, I can share an example. So one of our customers, when they start using us, they understood that one supplier where they get most of their goods, so they had a kind of revenue share of more than 70% of a specific supplier, but it was very unreliable. Right. So basically the POs arrived at different times, even though they fixed a specific production lead time in their agreement. Yeah. And then again, next step is not only you could then think about all those safety stock concepts, but then again, you could also think about optimizing your supply chain in general. Right. And thinking about both points now is also incredibly important. And then over time, as you said, you can get a better supply chain next to better reordering cycles based on your numbers and your basically fundament.
Yeah. Very, very exciting topic. I really like the examples. So we mentioned also at the beginning the complexity that grows once you use multiple warehouse locations. Maybe we can deep dive into that a little bit more. So basically, maybe you can share some examples of what are, in your point of view, the challenges of managing a decentralized inventory. Are there any strategies for improving that, especially with this multi setup?
Yeah, I mean, challenges are here definitely. If you even think about this multi warehouse setup, think about you have a central warehouse, 3PL, and you have Amazon FBA, for example. What you need to think about, especially when your lead time is quite high, what are my sent-ins in between, so that I reorder the right quantity based on the sent-ins to Amazon, but also based on the consumption in my main 3PL, based on the sales I do on Shopify or the FBM part. That's extremely challenging. And then just put another warehouse there. Could be a buffer warehouse or a warehouse or stock where you kind of have it at your supplier temporarily. So you have more stock you need to think about when you reorder. Do I first take the stock from my supplier and then I reorder? And this, like, the more warehouse you add, the more complexity arises, and the more the Excel sheet has limitations, is the most honest answer here. So hence we build a company around this problem, basically. So I think this is a great point where you can think about if inventory planning software systems can support you here. But in general, if a very actionable advice here, I think, is think about the future send-in, so of your end fulfillment warehouses, for example, FBA, which gets consumed from the current stock, and then take that into the reordering decisions.
Yeah. And I think one example we see quite a lot in our case, we see the Amazon FBA combination, for example. But what we also see is that now with the UK being kind of outside of the European Union, right? Many brands actually have a separate logistics setup in the UK versus continental Europe. And that, of course, also creates additional challenges. So you don't even need to sell multi-channel necessarily to have those challenges coming up.
Definitely. So I fully agree. You don't need a multi-channel setup. Most of the time, channel amplifies complexity plus warehouse amplifies inventory complexity. That was kind of our thought as well when we founded Spherecast. We thought, okay, who needs us the most? Which often are these specific setups that you mentioned, Petra.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that multi-channel is probably less predictable than multi-country, right? Multi-country, you could still argue, has similar similar seasonality, similar flows, whereas multi-channel might also have additional outliers that you don't expect, kind of.
Yeah, I would add here that multi-channel often means, you have, for example, your Shopify store, you have Amazon, and then if you start on wholesale, if you think about it, demand there and how demand is generated, it's completely different. In Shopify, you often push with specific marketing event. On Amazon, it's captured from search requests. And on B2B, it's also quite reactive. So this just increases, again, pain points, complexity from a forecasting side, which is for inventory planning incredibly important. And then you need to translate that into a supply chain decisions, which again, incredibly difficult. And then if you, in the translation point, again, you have like 3, 4, 5 warehouses, even 2, it gets incredibly complex.
Definitely. And what are your thoughts around multi-channel inventory management software? Are there any recommendations you have around that?
Well, Petra, I'm definitely biased here. So I think if the listeners, if you're into supply chain operations, working in an e-com brand, maybe having a more complex supply chain setup, we've built a company around it. Nevertheless, I think there's a multitude of inventory planning systems. It just depends what you want to have and how your setup looks like. If you're starting early with kind of Shopify, I think you can just basically go on the Shopify App Store and go for, look for inventory plan. You'll find something which, if you have one warehouse, not many SKUs, which probably would fit your needs. If you have a more complex supply chain setup, maybe also dedicated supply chain manager, or you're planning to, grow your supply chain team, then that's what we're trying to be the best at.
I think that's actually something I've kind of realized more and more throughout these episodes, right? That there's always the right solution for the right stage of every company.
Definitely.
And also for the right kind of setup. I think you can never say this is the optimal solution for everybody, and also kind of reviewing the tools you're using over time. I think it's quite essential for a lot of e-commerce companies.
Definitely.
Cool. Very good. Well, I would say this has been super, super insightful, Leon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Petra.
I'm not sure. I think for me, it's been really, really interesting to hear all of these examples. Do you think we missed anything important? Anything you want to add for our listeners to keep in mind?
I actually spoke with one of our customers before that, and he said one important thing what many people miss is base data, like in German Stammdaten. It's very important to nail that down when you're planning your supply chain. The wrong lead time can have, like the wrong number for lead time, the wrong number for anything can have severe implications. So make sure your setup is clean, because that's a big leverage for your planning.
Yeah, this is a huge topic also for us. I mean, also as a 3PL, right? Often if the data is not right, also for all the warehouse operations, it can create such big issues. If you think a product has a certain size or certain other elements,
Definitely,
and it's actually slightly different, there's big stories around that we see kind of regularly. So I think that's a super good point as a takeaway. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Then thank you so much once again, Leon. It has been really a great discussion. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. We will continue with our next topics. We try to always cover kind of different steps along the supply chain and the logistics process. Stay tuned for our next episodes. Thanks so much, Leon, again. Talk to you soon, and hopefully we'll have some more interactions in the future. I think it's a super critical point for both you and our company.
Yeah, thank you, Petra. Looking forward to the next conversation we'll have.
Thanks for tuning in to Just in Time, your go-to podcast for all things e-commerce logistics. Don't forget to share today's episode with your colleagues. Remember, timing is everything. For more information about Byrd's tech-driven e-commerce fulfillment services in Europe, visit getbyrd.com now.